Welcome to the second day morning session of Our Lives to Live Seeking a Just World. We have three films Burma, Vijay. The second film that we're going to see is Interrogation, and the third film is Dwand. Interrogation is by a Polish director, Adam Palenta, who was actually trying to come, but he didn't manage to get funding. And the third film is by Abhilash Vijayan, who's a student at FTII, called Dwand. It's won many awards. And we have Jairus Banerjee and MJ Pandey, who are both wonderful people to talk about the subject of today's. This is actually part two of the muzzling of freedoms. It's about state repression and resistances of various kinds, and all the films are, talking to that. And we had a lot of these films and discussions yesterday in part one too. So we'll just start.
When I pick up the camera, maybe my hands are shaking. I may have a heavy heartbeat. This is my country. And this is the way it has been for more than 40 years. In 1988, I was just a little boy.
And that the Burmese authorities are trying to calm things down, saying that the protests are over. This is not true.
Na lotnisku w Warszawie wysiadła radiostacja, a ja byłem radiotelegrafista. Ja mnie nie poznaje. Twoja żona.
4 और MOU कंपनी के साइन होने के बाद हमारे राज्य में कंपनी की संख्या 50 हो गई।
अभी बहुत काम बाकी है।
Jairus Banerjee is an economic historian and a research professor at SOAS in the University of London. He has worked with workers and unions in Bombay and was part of the group of people who formed Insaniyat as a platform of opposition to the explosion of communal violence in Gujarat in 2002. I was also part of Insaniyat and know Jairus since then, and so was MJ, a part of Insaniyat. MJ Pandey has sent me an extremely cryptic bio note about himself, so perhaps he'll expand on it. All I have here is an independent media journalist, trade unionist, and analyst. And I should have, before the screenings began, asked you to flesh it out, but I'll let you add more as discussion proceeds. Abhilash, the film we last saw, let me just tell you that he is still a final year direction student at FTII, at the Film and Television Institute of India in Pune. And Dwand has been at several national and international festivals and won quite a huge number of awards. For initial responses to the films we saw.
Smriti wanted me to say a few things about myself. There's very little I've done in life, so there's very little to say. Right now, I am also the General Secretary of the Brihan-Mumbai Union of Journalists. And we run a union among the press workers of Bombay. It's called the Maharashtra Media Employees Union. Let me go to the movies. I think the first movie was basically about kind of guerrilla journalism. I've seen this, I think, on TV, if I'm not mistaken, on NDTV. This is the second time I'm seeing it. I think it has some great shots about guerrilla journalism, about inspiring moments, basically 88, 99, 2007. But I think the movie lacks explanatory power. It doesn't explain how these forces rise, why did the monks take a particular decision. I think we needed a bit of that. Documentaries need explanatory power, and only then they become transformative experiences. So I felt excited that it had exciting bits, some great journalism, but I don't think there was enough explanatory power in the movie. There's just a furtive glance you see of a flag somewhere. a reddish kind of flag, even that is very discreetly cut. So I think somewhere there's a conscious decision not to go into that part of it. Crowds develop and how people take up issues, how spontaneity throws up all kinds of leaders. Great stuff on that. But still, I think for me, bottom line was not enough explanatory power.
What connects the three films together is the overpowering sense of the state. And obviously at some level, a sort of embodied analysis within a film and so on would help. I think what this was trying to do was something rather different, not so much to break down the situation in Myanmar or Burma analytically, as give you a sense of how the division between subject and object has broken down completely in the modern world. The camera is part of the situation, and the camera is the enemy as well, to a large extent. I mean, the state identifies the movement partly through the camera, so that it's not as if the camera is external to the situation. It's what MJ calls guerrilla journalism. It's not war being waged on the state by a kind of underground media network, but the underground media network is a sort of intrinsic part of a democratic mobilization that is sporadically emerging. So this sense that we no longer have a distinct subject and a distinct object, but that there's a kind of great deal of fluidity between journalism on the one hand and an emerging sense of a kind of democratic movement on the other, was what was so distinctive about the first movie, this sense of spontaneity that runs through it. Obviously, analytically speaking, there is a lacuna there because it doesn't explain how this barbaric regime has been able to retain its grip over Burmese society for something like close to 50 years now. Can I just go on to the other two films and then, yeah? What's very striking in Palenta's short movie is the architecture. I thought that was deliberate. Those shots, those bleak shots of prison architecture. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Phenomenal stuff, those images. And it seems to me what's significant there is that it's a metaphor for the state. What he's trying to tell us is that this is what the state is. And before we kind of leave with a sense of comfort that we live in a democracy, and that was a depiction of either a kind of Stalinist or a fascist regime, the ambiguity is deliberate. You're not quite sure whether it's a Nazi torture camp or a Stalinist torture camp and so on. But before we leave with that sort of comfortable sense that we live in a democracy and those are situations of extreme state repression, I think it's worth kind of reflecting a bit about exactly what's happening in India as well. I mean, the facade of our society, the political facade of our society is clearly a democracy. But the forces that have come into power today through the democratic process are anything but democratic. Let's be clear about that. They are deeply authoritarian. They're authoritarian at a cultural level. They're authoritarian at a political level. And in fact, what we're seeing in India today is something we've never seen in 50 years of our political history, which is a systematic takeover by an organization, namely the RSS, which isn't even one of the kind of formal political contestants on the stage. It's a kind of extra-constitutional authority, which is making a systematic, overt bid, to take the reins of power into its hands, with the appointment of chief ministers in Maharashtra and Haryana both being vetted by the RSS, essentially RSS appointments. Now, what the implications of this over the next 5 to 10 years are, I have no idea at the moment, but it's deeply disturbing. So the sense that there are some societies in the world which are democratic, namely vis-a-vis, like India, for example, or the USA, and other societies in the world, Burma, for example, Poland, around 46 or 47, which are not democratic. This Manichaean dichotomy between democracies on the one hand and non-democracies on the other it's a complete illusion. Because if you look at the world as a whole, what the Americans do, I mean, America may be a democratic society domestically or internally, but it's certainly not democratic in Afghanistan or Iraq and so on and so forth, okay? So the use of, the kind of use of American military strength in other parts of the world is scarcely an exercise in democracy, okay? Likewise with India, we've seen a party come to power which was implicated in horrific episodes of violence barely 12 years ago. What's broken down in India as the backbone of our democracy is the criminal justice system. That is what is broken down. If people had been punished for 1984, for the genocide in 1984, then I don't think Gujarat 2002 would have happened. There's a direct link between the two. The criminal justice system in this country has just broken down. It does not work. People can get away with murder literally, and they get away with political murder. But the justice system is, like the media and like journalism at some level, has to be the backbone of democracy. Just as we identify a democracy with certain kinds of very basic freedoms, including trade unionism, the right of workers to organize, etc., it seems to me that unless you have the legal backbone to that system, namely a criminal justice system that functions, that can deliver justice to people who have been victimized, then there's something deeply flawed about the democracy that exists. So, first of all, I don't think we should leave the room today with this kind of comforting sense that we live in a democracy and this can never happen to us. All three of these short movies speak to the issue of the state. The state is this entity, whether it's a left-wing state in sort of, Soviet Russia, or whether it's a kind of manifestly right-wing state and so on. The fact is that there's something about the state that breeds the kind of oppression that each of these three situations is depicting. One in a very latent sort of way, because it's discussing the background to a civil war raging in the heart of India, namely the Chhattisgarh film. Okay, the war in the background presupposes a hell of a lot. It presupposes all kinds of things. We start with a reference to these MOUs, and the guy asks, what's an MOU? That question itself is deeply significant, because after all, someone living in Chhattisgarh hasn't a clue what is going on economically. What sort of contracts are being signed there to mine and ravage the resources of that region and basically shatter the kind of Adivasi communities that exist there. But a hell of a lot is being presupposed in that small conversation, which is based on this short story. A lot of it is being presupposed. There's no attempt there, I think, to analytically draw any of it out. So the kind of comment that MJ made about the first movie could actually be made even more strongly in some way about the third one, because to a foreign audience in particular, which lacks context, I mean, we know the context, but to someone watching this, say, in France or in Britain, it wouldn't be clear what on earth is happening.